Hey everyone, welcome back to another week of Beat the Sheet, an Xbox Game Pass challenge. The only podcast aiming to complete every single one of the 496 titles that have been made available on Xbox Game Pass since the start of 2020. As always, I'm your host Andy Wood, and I'm joined by my co-host Josh.
Let me tell you, the minute that number hits 500, I'm out of here.
Well, I think it's going to be pretty soon, but so on this week's show, we're taking on goddamn electro freaks in Outriders. We travel back to the 80s in Narita Boy, and now even Sony is coming to Xbox Game Pass. It's been a crazy week.
It's not even an April Fool's. You know, that's my first thought was, is this just some form of sick joke? But no,
Yeah.
It's all happening. It's all going down in the world of Xbox Game Pass.
I like to think that they had the news ready on April 1st and just sat on it till the 2nd. They're like, we can't, guys. No one's gonna buy it on the 1st. Gotta wait. But anyway, how's your week been, Josh?
My week's been okay. It's passed on by. I've completed another couple of Battlefield game, as is my want. I've only got one more to go now in the Battlefield series. I'm downloading Battlefield 5 not as we speak, because I wouldn't be talking to you with my internet. But over the course of the Easter weekend, I will manage to get it downloaded. And then, yeah, there we go. All of Battlefield done. We can do a little rank the Battlefield games kind of segment. That'll be fun, won't it? Be like choosing your favorite STD. That's the kind of position we're in.
Yeah, just which part of your body is your favorite bit to get kicked in out of all of them? You know, just really run it down.
How about you? What have you been up to this week?
Yeah, no, I'm not too bad. It's been a busy week, lots of Game Pass stuff. I've got a major hurdle in my plans for future Game Pass playing, which is that my girlfriend started replaying Zelda Breath of the Wild in front of me, and I can't watch that game without wanting to just put like 200 hours into it. So I'm resisting so far. You know, I've got my head down, played some Outriders, Narita Boy and stuff this week, but it's on the horizon, man. I'm gonna end up doing Zelda again.
I don't know. Like, I know I'm in the minority here, but I don't think it's that good. I think it's good. I think it's Zelda good. And all Zelda games are like a 9 out of 10, but it's not my favorite. I stand by it. I think Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are considerably more interesting Zelda games than Breath of the Wild, but I am literally the only man in the world who thinks that. So
no, that's fair though. I think it just depends kind of what you're after, you know. Like obviously there's a traditional pattern to Zelda games that Breath of the Wild has thrown out. And I mean I love all the Zelda games, but there's just something about the discovery in that world. I don't know. I always feel interested in checking out something that's on the horizon and, you know, kind of just seeing what's there. And eventually that will fade. You know, I've played through it twice already. So I imagine a couple more times through and I'll probably just know too much about the world to really enjoy it. But you know, one of these days they'll release the sequel, so then I can move on to that. But anyway, this is it's got to be right. They'll probably tighten it up a lot. But anyway, yeah, this is obviously a Game Pass challenge and not a Let's Play Zelda, so we should probably move on to all this week's Game Pass stuff.
Okay, there have been 2 new additions to the Xbox Game Pass service this week, and they are Narita Boy and Outriders. Just the 2? But still 2 pretty cool games, 2 day 1 launches into Xbox Game Pass. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, you gotta love day 1 launch into Game Pass. You know, it's like kind of, I think of all the things that just really make you feel the value of this service, it's when a game comes out and it's straight in there. Because, you know, I'm not saying I would have bought Outriders, but that's like a £50 game, and immediately you've got it. You play it straight away. It's great. And then even Narita Boy, I think that came out at about £20. So that's just so much value to be able to jump in on day 1. So yeah, I mean, I've got no complaints with this week.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's no way in hell I'd have bought Outriders. Just good God, no. There's no chance. But I might have bought Narita Boy, so I'm pretty glad that I didn't have to do that. You know, so it's just £70 worth of value. That's almost, half a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate paid for in 2 titles. Not bad going. Not bad going at all. I mean, we've both spent a little bit of time with Outriders. It's a big, long 30-hour action RPG, so we've certainly not finished it, but we've definitely played enough to give you our thoughts on it. So what do you make of this? It's kind of a looter shooter with some RPG kind of Mass Effect-y skill tree elements to it and a big, giant sci-fi story, which takes itself very seriously. So what do you make of it so far?
Yeah, I'm enjoying my time with Outriders. I think it's a game that is going to grow on a lot of people. Obviously, this is a game where they released a demo that was very generous, to be fair to them. It was a demo where you could play the first few hours and then all your progress came into the main game. More companies do that, please. That's a very good way of doing a demo. And I kind of played that demo, and I got to say the first maybe 2 hours of it, the kind of prologue before this game really kicks into what it actually is, I was a little bit bored. I liked the world and some of the kind of world building around how how they were putting the story together, but the actual gameplay was pretty dull. And then that all kind of blows up in your face. You become some kind of powered guy. You pick one of these 4 classes where you have some sort of crazy superpowers, like you basically become a fire magician, or you become some guy who does like earth attacks and just shocks everyone out of the way, all that kind of cool stuff. And I think once that comes in, the game picks up the pace quite a bit. And yeah, from then on, to be honest, I've just been on an upwards trajectory with this thing. As I get more powers and more skills, I'm just enjoying it more and more. So yeah, I'm pretty high in it so far.
It's a pretty decent game. I don't dislike it. Let's kind of dig into what the story is. So essentially, you play as the last remnants of Earth. We've destroyed it at last, and we've flown off into the galaxy to discover a new planet. Everyone's in cryo sleep for God knows how many years, and you play as an outrider who is there to step foot on the planet, see what's happening, make grounds, make everything happy and welcoming for the norms who are eventually going to land on the planet. All of 15 minutes on the planet, and you realize, well, this was a bad idea because it all goes to heck within about half an hour of your being there, which is kind of cool. Your dude gets lobbed back into a cryo chamber, goes into another 30-year sleep. So this guy has been sleeping for 80 years on the plane, now 30 years on the planet. If you think it's inherently hilarious, he has 2 time jumps within half an hour of the game opening. You're on my kind of wavelength because that is funny. Yeah. And he wakes up, and everything's gone to heck again. All the humans hate each other, and we're killing each other because that is what humanity does. And this planet is keeping us all here with some weird electrical storm. It's a decent enough setup, and your dude has developed superpowers of some form. It's interesting, although it's somewhat poor-faced, to say the least. The writing is a little bit over the top, is a little bit dramatic for what is there. But it does undercut it sometimes with decent enough humor. Your lead character actually does seem to understand that this whole scenario is absolutely ridiculous, which I kind of like. I kind of embrace that somewhat. But yeah, an interesting setup for a sci-fi world. Perhaps my biggest issue is that you landed on this planet. It's this beautiful verdant space, full of new creatures and gorgeous landscapes to explore. And then within 5 minutes, it's a dirty, brown, post-apocalyptic wasteland after you just escaped a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I mean, again, that's hilarious, but it's also still post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, that kind of killed me a bit with this game, because I feel like I can have one thing or the other, right? Where the first half an hour, the game actually looks kind of beautiful. There's some like really cool hints of like wildlife going around that, like weird alien monster type things, but they're just animals. They look great. There's all this color to it, but I'm not enjoying the game at that point because you don't have any cool powers. There's no fast paced gunplay yet. Then you go to the other side of the game, like half an hour. Well, you go to the full game half an hour later, and it's like the gameplay starts to pick up. You got these powers, you're zooming all over the place, like just kicking ass. But now the game is just generic brown, Mad Max looking place, and that's just so. I've done enough of that, I was so disappointed that was kind of the landscape that I'm not gonna, I assume, spend most of the game in. Like, I've only played about 8 to 10 hours of this, so I wouldn't want to completely cut it down and say that's all there is. But I assume most of this game is going to be, largely deserty, and that's just a bit disappointing.
Bit of a shame, they had an interesting setting which they perhaps cast away, but the trailers and the teasers that they've played all in and out the games kind of showed like snowier areas and other greener areas. So there's probably going to be a bit of variety in the world eventually once you, work your way to it. I suppose Outriders at its very core, though, is just a cover shooter. This is developed by People Can Fly, the Polish developer behind Bulletstorm and Gears of War Judgment and Painkiller, all the way back on the PC if you're old enough to remember it. Good games, pretty enjoyable games, and the mechanics here are very sound. They're very solid. This plays, the shooting itself is snappy enough. It feels hefty enough. It's an enjoyable cover shooter. I'd say it slips into repetition very quickly. I mean, it has those awful tropes of all cover shooters where nothing's going to happen until there's a chest-high wall, which has suddenly just emerged, and you go, well, guess I'm having a fight now. And it falls into that trope pretty regularly, to say the least.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think the one thing I'm really enjoying about Outriders so far is that it is obviously a cover shooter. As you said, there's the chest high walls that just line every single place, whether it makes sense or not. But then also it seems like depending on the class you go for, like you have a lot of potential to kind of shake up that rhythm. Like I chose this guy who's basically like a big tanky bastard who can like use earth attacks and shockwaves and stuff, and he regains health by killing people next to him. So I kind of play this really aggressive and fast paced now because if I'm almost out of health, but I think I can get close and kill someone, that's actually my best way of staying alive now rather than staying behind the cover. So I'm actually really enjoying that kind of fast paced spin on this at the moment. Now, I haven't tried the other classes, so, the kind of mileage may vary in terms of how exciting the gameplay is with them. But yeah, from the one I picked, I'm really enjoying that rhythm. I do think obviously with all of these games, after you've played a certain amount of them, every battle is just going to feel like a battle you've played before. It's just the way these games go, right? There's a limited amount of enemies, even when you reach different like factions of enemies, you're going to have like the little easy to kill guys and then the big guys with armor on that take more shots and then the big boss guy. It's all going to form that pattern. But, for now, I'm enjoying it. And I feel like I'm going to enjoy this enough to get through it.
Yeah, there's a lot to like. I mean, I played as the trickster character type who can kind of like dash around the world. He has like a teleport button, very similar to like Dishonored, for example, where you can just point at an area and you appear behind them and you can just shoot them there. The game's health system is quite interesting because you do only recover health when you kill people pretty much all the time. You get a full health bar once a battle has ended, and there's very segmented areas. So you don't go from one to another. You'll kind of know when one is done. Your bar will refill up, and then you'll move to the next area. But that is kind of a fun way to play the game. It forces aggression. I like any first-person shooter or third-person shooter in this case, which forces aggression and forces you to get into the face of your enemies and make use of the abilities which you have, which are quite cool. You do get a lot of different skill abilities. You've got a lot of different skill tree points to customize your character further still. There's a lot of ways you can change how you approach each fight. And I actually think that's probably the best part of the game. The actual versatility in the combat system is quite cool, particularly with the powers you have, which are gloriously overpowered, which I love. You should be overpowered. You're some altered superhuman freak. You should be better than the people around you. It's only when you face fellow altered humans that the game kind of starts to up its challenge a little bit, and you have to be a little bit more clever about how you play it. I like that. I think that's pretty cool. I will say I've played about 5 to 6 hours of this game, and it gets into such a regular rhythm of doing the exact same thing. Like the game so far to me has just been go to arena, kill some dudes, go to the next arena, kill some dudes, eventually get the trinket I came here for and teleport back to base, and then just do the same thing over and over again. And it's not exactly inspired game design. It's fine. It's serviceable. It does the job. It's very looter shooter. It's all about what you're going to get in the terms of, new armor, new guns at the end of this kind of thing, which will, give you more sodden points. Who cares? I can't care about a better sniper rifle. I never have done, and I still don't now. But so it's kind of hoping you'll be hooked into that loop, and I can't get on board with that. I want set pieces, man. This game, for such a bombastic kind of opening, you didn't really do anything. The most you had was like you ran away from some fallen debris, and that's it. That's the only variation in game design in the first 6 hours of this game. And that to me is just kind of dull. Like this is just so by the numbers cover shooter that it's disappointing as well because People Can Fly can do this. Bulletstorm, Gears of War Judgment had weird little set pieces, and yet I've yet to see them in Outriders yet. Perhaps they're on the horizon, but I've yet to see them yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. My experience so far, and as I said, I think I've done a few more hours than you, is that it is basically just go to an arena, beat all the enemies in the arena, and then have one of those comically kind of gamified ways to move to the next area, where it's like hold X in front of this pile of rocks and you'll smash the rocks so that you can walk through to the next area. Like just really like really old school stuff. It reminds me of, when you'd be playing like an old Call of Duty and you'd have to just stand there and wait for some man to open a door so you could go through to the next area and stuff. But whatever, it's fine. It separates the different parts of the level, I guess. And it's probably there for the co-op aspect as well, actually, because this is meant to be played, up to 3-player co-op. So I guess that kind of keeps all the team together and stuff, which would be helpful. So yeah, I don't know. I don't mind that, but I do agree. I hope that as this goes on, finds a bit more of a voice for these kind of big dramatic set pieces, because they've definitely got the talent for them. And I think like I said, I think the combat is solid. It's really fun. It's really fast paced and aggressive. It just needs to do something a little different as it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I can see myself happily doing 30 hours of the same thing here and not getting bored of it, because the core systems are good enough. It's all there. Mechanically, it's pretty solid. I can't fault Outriders on that sense. It actually plays pretty damn well. So that's good. That's all you can ever ask for in a game like this. Some people's mileage may vary. I mean, all first-person shooters essentially just go around and shoot folk. I mean, there's not usually that much variety in games. Like most game design, when you boil it down, is very repetitive. It just, this sort of genre screams repetition a little bit more to me than perhaps others do. I'll say there's other things which kind of irk me about it. I think the menu system on the whole is pretty good, but the way you have to dispose of loot to swap in and out of it, it's just a little finicky. There's a lot of menus, a lot of dragging and dropping. If you have old useless armor, you have to hold a button to look at the weapon and then hold a button to dismantle the weapon. I just want a quick select dismantle button just to get it done quickly and easily. That would be much, much appreciated. And as well as that, they made the horrific stylistic decision to have a shaky cam on all of the cutscenes, and to the point where it tanks the frame rate at times, even though it doesn't. It just looks like it is because of the stupid effect of the shaky cam. It looks like the game is buffering when it isn't. It's just a stupid visual effect, and it kind of just makes me a bit ill. And it also makes me not want to watch the cutscenes because it's just constantly wibbling around like it's a Michael Bay movie, and I don't really understand why it did it. I can't even fathom how they thought that was a good idea. And nobody, I mean, I wouldn't mind, but in the demo, people called them out on it. It doesn't seem to be an altered radical.
Yeah, I think that at the very least, they've added a option, so you can turn it off in the options menu. But obviously, they've still chose to keep it on, so most people are going to experience it with it on. But I guess that's something. If it really does bother you, you can at least shut it down. But yeah, I kind of agree with a lot of your thoughts on this one, to be honest. As you said, it's not a perfect product, not a perfect setup so far. It's got those typical looter shooter problems where you just end up with a inventory full of trash, simply enough. You might get one thing that's useful, and then you end up with 20 things you just need to do the stupid, tedious dismantling of. There's shops to buy new stuff, but it feels pointless because you'll buy a new shotgun and then in 25 minutes time, it'll be too low leveled for you now, and you just wasted all your money. So that feels kind of pointless too. These are things that might get better as you get further in the game. It might take longer to level up and you start to kind of get the value out of stuff like that. But early on, it just feels like I might as well just not bother with any of that aspect of the game. Just put on the highest damage item I've got, use it for 20 minutes, check the menu again and put the next one on. There's no real time to get any attachment to any kind of weapons. But as I said, I think that what's here is enough to be enjoyed. It's enough that I'm going to enjoy it for the time it's going to run. And I also think as well, it's worth giving it a bit of credit for the fact that it's just a big dozy third person shooter. We don't actually get that many of these. It's kind of most of the third person games that are really good are your stuff like your Gears of Wars, which they're great shooting games, but they're heavily cover based, right? You have to play tactical in Gears of War, really. Whereas this is just a big, dopey, fast paced bit of a kind of, superpower fantasy nonsense. And I don't know, that's actually weirdly, I don't want to say it's original, but there's not much competition for this right now in the gaming industry. So it's nice to have it.
Yeah, I mean, the looter shooter genre is almost exclusively being first person. So it is nice to see one slip into the third person perspective. That's pretty cool. I think actually the side missions that I've done have been pretty well written in the sense that they feel important. I mean, there's one really early on where some dude jumps you out into no man's land and you just have to survive. And then you go and murder him in a side mission. I mean, that could have been a main quest, yet they've sparsed it off for side content. So the side content feels kind of relevant and kind of, it actually adds to the story rather than just being there to pad out the runtime, which I like. I appreciate that. There's stuff to enjoy here. It's not a bad game by all means. I actually think it would be a blast in co-op. I think this would be a great, if you had 3 or 4 different classes all causing havoc in an arena, that would be a heck of a lot of fun. So kind of would love to play this in co-op, although I never will. It's a decent game. It's perfectly serviceable. It's the kind of title which I think would have died a death on launch if it wasn't in Game Pass. I think it's actually been served very well by getting an instant audience via this service, which I think is pretty cool. Good for it. I wish it all the success in the world, but I don't see myself finishing this until I have to. I
Yeah, I
may
mean,
instantly drop off it and just go, I've seen enough for me.
yeah, I mean, you're a man who's put this to one side this week to play even more Battlefield, so it's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
that's where you stand. But yeah, I'm the same as you. I hope it goes well for it, and obviously it's got a good audience right now. A quick PSA before we move on: there was some server trouble with this game in its early couple of days. It sounds as though that's resolved now for the most part, but that sort of stuff's very normal for these massive games that massive server based games. You got this with the Destinies when they came out. It's pretty standard, but I would say if you're jumping into this game online and you are having issues and it's kind of logging you out and kicking you out, maybe just put it to one side for a week. Just let them sort that out. There's kind of no point frustrating yourself with it now when you can just pick it up in a week. It's going to be on Game Pass for a while yet. So yeah, there's no rush.
There's no rush. I'd say, I mean, we're not reviewing this, but I'd say it's tracking towards a 6 for me at the moment. I think it's perfectly playable, a decent enough title. Well worth a go if you're into the genre, but nothing I would say particularly special.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm probably at a 7 at the moment. I'm just really enjoying that fast-paced, aggressive gameplay. But yeah, definitely too early to give it a proper review.
Okay, let's move on to our next title this week, which is Narita Boy. Now, this is a 2D side-scrolling action game with some platformy elements, though not too many of them, and is essentially a hark back to the old 90s heyday, although it's set in the 80s. This is very much a 90s platformer. And it's got a very good art style, you've got to give it that much. It comes with this CRT filter, which is as good a CRT filter as I've ever seen in a video game, even if I switched it off after 45 minutes.
See, I just left on whatever the default setting was, so I probably played with it the whole time. Yeah, as you said, this is it's a cool little retro inspired game. I like how heavily they've leaned into that retro feel. This isn't just do some pixel art and call it a day. They've actually really leaned into the kind of style of an 80s piece of entertainment, which I really appreciate. And yeah, I think I just like how much they've stuck to that goal.
Yeah, there's a lot to actually quite like here. There's a lot of interesting little 80s throwbacks and stuff like that. Let's kind of look into what the story is. The story is very kind of tronny. You basically play as a kid who's been pulled into a computer, into his games console to play this game called Narita 1. Or he's in Narita Boy on the Narita 1. It's all very... I mean, who cares? And, essentially, you've got to go through this game's code to stop an evil entity called him from escaping into the real world and destroying us all, or something like that. Not the Powerpuff Girls villain, as I hoped it would be last week. Huge disappointments on that front, but it's interesting enough, even though I would say it seems to think it's far more interesting than it actually is. This game's dialogue boxes seem to run on for an eternity. People just don't shut up in Narita Boy. For an old game, they love to talk.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. My issue with this game is that, as we said, the style's kind of on point. There's some great creativity in here as well. Like in terms of the artistic direction and design, they managed to just make almost everything a computer in a really weird way. You'll get a horse that's a computer. There'll be like priests that are all just PCs with big monitor faces. Like that's all great. But the dialogue is, I mean, I basically gave up on reading it before too long because every character will just have huge walls of text to read, and it's all a bit, it's intentionally written in a bit of a tedious way because it's trying to they're all computer programs effectively, these characters, so they're all talking in very kind of techie ways, and it's just, I don't know, it's not interesting to read. It doesn't get to the point. Basically, there'll be about 3 walls of text, and your better solution, rather than traipsing through it all, is just to press the button that brings up your objectives when they finish talking, and your objective will say, oh, you need to go to that balcony now and get the key. That's the most efficient way to get through it for me. I couldn't read it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat obnoxious, to be fair. I think it's intentionally obnoxious. It's trying to be, a little bit teasingly ridiculous. All the characters talk about Narita Boy in an over-the-top way. Often they'll end things, well, you must save us, Narita Boy, and like an extended trailer. I kind of think that's funny, but the joke kind of wears thin after a little while. And it also does mean that in terms of getting actual useful information, you stop reading the dialogue and just wait for the end of like conversation pop-up box to tell you what the important bit actually was, which is probably not a good sign you've wrote something compelling. I'll say that the actual combat itself is pretty satisfying. It's It's fairly
Yeah.
bare bones stuff, but it plays pretty well. You just have a basic sword attack, a dash button, a back dash button, and a few different power ups you acquire as you go through the game. It kind of flows into different enemy situations as well. They have a lot of different enemy types, which I
Yeah.
like a lot. So there's a lot of variety of the enemy types, and they kind of throw them in together in interesting ways, which forces you to think about how you're going to dispatch them rather than just hammering the X button and hoping for the best. You have to think about combat in Narita Boy, and I appreciate that. I think that's good stuff. There's stuff to like here, admittedly, but I don't know if it ever elevates itself beyond just being a kind of like a solid level of entertainment. There's not many inspired moments here.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I was never particularly excited whilst playing this game. I do think that the biggest strength of the combat is that for a game that runs about 6 or 7 hours, there is a really good amount of enemy variety in this game. It's a lot more than you'd expect to see from similar kind of indie projects. So that's really good. The combat, it's, as you said, it's basic but effective. It feels like there's some good force behind your attacks. They do well with that. There's good visual effects, good sound design that makes it feel like there's a bit of a crunch when your attacks hit and stuff like that. They kind of bring in this feature as you go through the game where you can charge yourself up with like colored energy, and then you deal more damage to enemies of the same type, but they deal more to you. Like, that feels a bit underbaked, it has to be said. I think as the game goes on, I don't think they expand on that feature enough, really. It's, you just get the odd fight where an enemy has a blue circle above his head, so you charge the blue power before you hit him. It's fine, but it maybe they could have went in a different direction to get some more depth than doing that. But yeah, again, combat's decent enough. But in terms of like the overall level design in this game, where did you feel like land on with that? Because I found it a bit up and down, I think.
Yeah, this is a strange game because a lot of reviewers build this as a Metroidvania kind of title, but it isn't really. It's kind of
Yeah.
stages which are slightly labyrinthine. The essential core of the game is you need to find these codes to open up different portals, which will give you floppy disks to open different doors. And although you can get lost in the stages aren't that big that you can't ever just wander around until you find it. And if you're paying attention, you can kind of follow what doors haven't opened yet anyway and which way you need to go next. I was never lost, to give it its due. I never got lost at one point. I didn't even struggle with any of the codes, although it does the infuriatingly 90s thing where it demands that you remember them, and then you get to the thing, you put them in. I found a way around that by just taking a picture of them. I've got about 17 photos on my phone of Narita Boy symbols, which I just scrolled through and then put into the little teleporters when I needed to. Is that particularly good game design? Not really. I shouldn't have to be taking photos of the screen to remember what I need to do later on, but I found a way around it. It kind of gets bored of that after 65, 70% of its runtime. And I actually preferred the game when it did get bored of it, when it became even more linear. The game's very linear, but this is particularly linear in its final stretch. As you say, it's a bit up and down. There's some cool powers you get. You mentioned you get this horse, which you can ride on through, and you have to avoid some obstacles. That was okay. You also get a floppy disk, which you ride on the ocean waves, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah,
so it's like it's very up and down, even in the kind of like set PC moments of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's I think it's an interesting idea to kind of not let themselves get too tied down into a specific style of level design, because obviously, as we said, other than the combat, there's not much else going on. So, I wouldn't have wanted to spend a whole game finding shapes to put them in, finding symbols to put into teleporters. And I wouldn't have wanted to also probably spend a whole game with just linear enemy corridors. So, there's an argument to be said they found a good balance. I actually found that my favorite part of this game was the floppy disk surfboard level. I think that kind of part of the game takes place in an area that goes completely around on itself. Like if you walk to the right through the screen enough, you actually end up back at the starting point. And that was a cool area. I enjoyed that quite a lot. But as you said, they do these things and then they go, let's move on and do something different. So, that has its pluses and minuses really. But yeah, it works pretty well.
It works pretty okay. Some people will be frustrated by the lack of a map. You have no map to, position yourself in the world. You kind of have to take it by, what you see in the background and just make a mental note of it. I never struggled. I know a lot of people who played this did find themselves getting lost a lot. So I'd say if you are going to pick it up, just pay attention. Yeah, I don't think you'll have too many issues as long as you're just keeping an eye on what's going on around you. It's an okay little game. It's a decent enough time. There's a lot to enjoy here. The music's very good. It's
Yeah.
been an enjoyable kind of like 80s synth score, just runs all the way through it. It's got a lot of different boss fights. Some of them are better than others. I'll say the biggest issue with the boss fights for me is that they all seem to have just a attack pattern. They had a attack, which you kind of memorized after you died one time, and then you could just beat it the second time because they didn't do anything different. They literally did the exact same thing. There's no like, oh, now he's going to do those are like 5 or 6 attacks they could pick from random. They did the exact same thing in the exact same order. And that's okay. That's fine. But it just means that you're going to get it eventually.
Yeah, I think the issue with that as well is that, they kind of follow the same attack patterns, but then some of the bosses also take quite a lot of damage to get down. So you end up having to cycle through that pattern about 5 times to actually finish the enemy off, which, they've almost exposed their own problem there. If the bosses had less health, you might not have necessarily noticed that it's just super repetitive. But because they do take a bit of a beating, it really does kind of shine through by the end of the fights.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an issue. The way that you gain health in this game, you don't actually gain any health back at any point unless you charge yourself up with these bars of energy. But even then, you only get one tiny little brick of health at any point, so it's practically useless. To the point where, fortunately, the game is very well checkpointed. There seems to be a checkpoint every 5 or 10 seconds. Basically, every screen of the world seems to be a new checkpoint. That's probably for the best, because that's the only way you can really gain any health back, is when you die, you come back with a full bar of health. So there's many a times you'll go into a boss fight with 4 or 5 bars of health, and you can't win it. You don't have enough health. You're not going to get it. And in many ways, it kind of helps because you use that fight to learn the attack pattern, die, and then come and try again with a full bar of health. But the way they do dish out, it is a bit silly that you don't have any like health refills at any point. That you just keep going along until you eventually die and then try again. It's a little bit ridiculous that certain encounters, you're just going to have to die and go back to the checkpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. That health recovery system, as you said, you charge these whole bars just to get one single block of health back. It's similar to what I said about that color attack system earlier. It's just a little bit half baked. They clearly had an idea and it kind of just got put in the game before it was really, really ready to be in there, I think. So it's fine. I mean, it could be easily resolved by just saying charge one of those up and you get full health again, because obviously by the looks of the game's checkpoints, they don't care. They don't want you to have to run a big gauntlet before you beat the game. They're happy to just say, oh, you died. Here you go. Here's 20 seconds ago. You can start from there. So I don't know why you would put such a restrictive like health recovery system in a game where you've got a million checkpoints. It's just a little strange and maybe not fully thought through. But as we said, on the whole, this is a good little indie action game. I enjoyed my time with it enough. These games aren't always my cup of tea, to be honest. This one probably hits the limit of the amount of time I like from these kind of games. Takes about 6 hours to get through, which is fine. But yeah, I enjoyed that time enough. I was done when it was finished, but it was fine for while it lasted.
Yeah, it's a perfectly enjoyable game. The platforming's a little bit slippy. I wasn't a massive fan of the platforming. It's not the most comfortable character to control. They say you can press down to stop dead in the air, but that doesn't really help much either because you just slightly miss and go flying off the platform. Not exactly ideal, but there's not much in the way of like hardcore platforming sections you're going to struggle with, and the checkpoints will help you get through it anyway. The story itself, it's okay. It seems to be about the creator of this console and some weird religion he seems to have started. It goes to strange and weird little places. It kicks off with a dead parent because, of course, it does. It's an indie game. Somebody had to die. So that's cool. Fantastic for that. But it takes along and it's kind of interesting. It's kind of weird, and it ends on a cliffhanger of sorts, I suppose. Yeah. It's not the most satisfying ending in the world, but it does have a kick-ass final song. Great final song. Love the end karaoke number in this game. It's damn good. So there's stuff to like. I enjoyed it on the whole. I don't think it's a startling example of what indie gaming can be. I think it's about the same 2D action indie game I've played about 100 million times in the past 10 years now, but it's not a bad version of it. I'd probably say it's a 6 out of 10. It's worth a play if you like the genre, but it's not exactly essential, I would say.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot as you. The kind of action and the platforming in this game is pretty much by the books in terms of indie action games. If you like these games, you'll like this one. But it ain't going to change your mind if you're not a fan. But again, the bits that I like about this, as I said, it really leans into its style quite well. It's really nailed that 80s style. the creativity behind all the kind of, floppy disk surfboards and computerized horses and stuff. That's really clever. So it does enough to warrant a playthrough if you're a fan of these games. But yeah, again, I'm at a 6 out of 10 too for this one. And I would say one thing, and it's so petty, but I absolutely hate it in this game, is that on about 3 occasions, for absolutely no logical reason, your Narita Boy character starts doing a stupid little dance, and it's like he's a Fortnite character. And I don't know why he's doing it. It doesn't fit with the game, and it just irritated me. But nonetheless, yeah, 6 out of 10.
Oh God, you are so old. You've just gotten so old in your life.
No time for this stuff, man.
This past few months, you've just the concept of dancing and fun just kills you. Just kills you dead.
There was no reason for him to dance. Like, he hadn't even done anything good. Like, he didn't dance when he saved when he finishes the game and stuff. He just dances at a random time. Like, some priest says some crap at him, and he's like, I guess I'll floss in front of you for a bit. Like, no, why? What are you doing? Just go home, Narita Boy. Don't save the world. Ugh.
Oh dear. Okay, let's move on from the grumpy man and his cloud, and let's just highlight a few of the games which are coming soon to Game Pass. We've had a few release dates announced for upcoming titles. We know that NHL 21 will come into EA Play on the 12th of April, so not long to wait. So I can get addicted to hockey again. Really looking forward to that. Yep. EA Play has also announced that FIFA 21 will be coming into the service in May. So that's not too bad, right at the end of the football season, but that's still only 5 months, 6 month turnaround for a new FIFA game. Yeah, pretty cool.
Not bad.
And I guess
just in time for the Euros as well, which is nice.
Exactly, it can make your Euro tournament. And the big one, the big news of the week is that MLB The Show 21, the Sony PlayStation Studios title, is coming day one into Game Pass on April the 20th. It's first time on Xbox consoles. Day one into Game Pass. This is as bonkers a bit of a news story as I think we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, this is absolutely crazy. I was posting about this on Reddit and stuff, and I was just saying this has to be the single wildest Game Pass release we've ever had. Like there's bigger games, or there's bigger, like the Bethesda acquisition is obviously a huge news story and a huge acquisition, but this is a Sony developed game that has been exclusive to PlayStation consoles for its entirety. Like, it's never been on anything else. So it was already a big story this year that it had been moved, it was coming out on other consoles. And it sounds like a lot of that is down to MLB themselves. They were kind of becoming increasingly unhappy that their entire franchise was stuck on a single console. So, you could understand that a world where Sony would make the game for other consoles to appease MLB and to keep the franchise going. But to come to Game Pass is just, I don't know. You could have told me to name like 50 games that I think would never come to Game Pass, and I wouldn't have even put this on the list because it's so unlikely. I'd be like, yeah, well, obviously a Sony game won't come to Game Pass. Like, there's no chance. It's crazy. I'm not quite sure how this has happened, but it's impressive, and it sure makes Xbox look good. That's for sure.
I can only imagine Phil Spencer drove a dumpster truck of money up to the executives at MLB, because there's no way in heck Sony were approving this on their end. They must have been completely blindsided on this one, because they just wouldn't have agreed to this. I don't see any scenario where Sony would agree to a $70 PS5 game going free into their competitor's service on day of launch. It's just such a terrible look for Sony. Now, I can only imagine they've just gone over their heads. And I do wonder if this might be the end of that relationship come next year's development cycle, because this is pretty bad luck for Sony. Great news for Xbox consumers. They're finally getting a good baseball game, probably the best baseball game out there, coming day one into Game Pass. It's a huge acquisition for Xbox, even if you're not a massive fan of the sport. But it's a terrible look for Sony, who must be tearing their hair out that this has managed to happen.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy one. Like, I'm sure Sony are getting compensated very generously for this, but at the same time, it's just that reputational damage, right? I mean, this makes Xbox look so good compared to Sony that I don't know how much money you can be paid to make this okay. It doesn't really map out very well. So, as you said, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there won't be an MLB The Show 22. Maybe this is just a bit too much of a slight against Sony if this was an MLB-led decision. I mean, as you said, it's probably the most logical thing that it was, because it just doesn't make any sense otherwise. But yeah, huge acquisition for Game Pass. I mean, we're talking there about other sports games that are coming into EA Play this month and next month, and those games are like half a year old, and that's still really good. But this is a day one title. This is the first day that this brand new sports series is available, and every Xbox Game Pass player can just play it instantly. It's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible stuff. I mean, we did our sports ranking feature only a few weeks ago, and now we could update it with baseball in a couple of weeks' time. That'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to playing this game. It's the last sport, to be honest, that's not really represented on Game Pass. I mean, there's others, but, rugby doesn't exactly have a famous video game franchise, so you wouldn't expect that to pop up. And, I'd love a snooker game, but I think we can all accept it ain't going to come in. So, yeah, this is the last big sport to not have its own title. It's pretty cool that it's here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see like a PGA 2K21 dropping into the service in the next few months as well, because if you're a sports game fan, you've almost got the most recent version of every sports title in Game Pass at the moment. Yeah. You're just as happy as Larry if all you want to play is sports titles. There's a heck of a lot of top tier sports titles covering pretty much every sport conceivable. This is pretty good. It's a pretty good deal, this, if you're a sports guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? Like, Game Pass was always a bit of a thing where, the one type of gamer it didn't target was the gamer that just plays Call of Duty and FIFA every year. And they're kind of starting to now, it's they're getting there. If somehow Call of Duty ends up in this as well, then like everyone might as well just own Game Pass. So really good deal.
Okay, let's move on to our leaving soon titles. And we've got 3 titles announced for this next couple of weeks, leaving on the 16th of April. They are Deliverers the Moon, Gato, Roboto, and Wargroove. Now, just the 3 title, all 3 small indie kind of titles. What do you make of this week? It's an easy one for us on the whole, because I'd certainly played 2 of them. I played Deliverers and Gato, so it's just Wargroove for me. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it's not a bad little set of leaving soon titles. It's a good come down after we've had to do like all of Witcher 3 in a couple of weeks and stuff like that. This is a pretty easy list for people. I mean, Gato Roboto is about 3 hours long. Deliverers the Moon is sort of 4 to 6 hours long. So those are pretty easy wins. Wargroove takes more time. I think if you mainline the story missions, Wargroove's meant to be about a 20-hour experience, but I mean, I'm going to be honest. I'll be playing that on Switch anyway. If you make a game that's a clone of Advance Wars, I'm playing that on a Nintendo handheld, I'm afraid. So I'm not massively constrained to the leaving soon date, but I will be very much working hard to get it wrapped up in time.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same situation. I've owned Wargroove on the Switch for a long time because I own all indie games on the Switch and play none of them. But I've been told to get back in the office next week, so this is my commuting game of choice for the next 2 weeks. So yeah, I'll work my way through it. I'll hopefully have it finished by the time it leaves Game Pass, but it doesn't particularly matter if I don't. I'll just finish it a couple of days later on the tube. So yeah, looking forward to playing that, though. I've always wanted to play Wargroove, just never found the time to actually do it. But for this week, we're going to focus on Deliverers the Moon and Gato Roboto. Next week, we'll drop in with our thoughts on Wargroove. It is like a 20-hour game, though. It's a quick PSA. So if you do want to play Wargroove, I'd start it now. If you've had it on the to playlist, I'd maybe give it an install as quickly as possible. But let's talk about the first title, Deliverers the Moon. Now, this is one of those wonderful Game Pass games where you go into space and something's gone wrong. Because if it's not a dead parent, something's gone wrong on a space station. This is the modern state of indie gaming.
Honestly, man, like I think that find out what happened to these people in space is the single number one most represented thing in Game Pass. Like it's probably even more than sports games. Like there's been Prey from Arcane Studios. There's been Tacoma. Observation is still in Game Pass, and then Deliver Us the Moon, which is about to leave, obviously. But like so many games about just what happened. Like everyone's gone. You're in space. What the hell happened? It's strangely overrepresented.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy. It's how this seems to keep cropping up in developers' meetings. And this game in particular, if you did play Fulbright Studios Tacoma, is very similar to Fulbright Studios Tacoma, to the point where I don't know if these guys were working next door to each other and they just cribbed off each other's homework, because this almost takes things wholesale from that game in the terms of like holographic people who you follow around and see the memories of. That is exactly what was in Tacoma. So this is not just a similar plot line. It kind of just plays the same as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's like they both started with the same template. It's like, we're going to do holographs for memories. You're going to follow them around. You're going to figure out what happened. And then obviously Tacoma and Fulbright went in a full on like narrative path. And then Deliver Us the Moon kind of went down more of a I don't want to say it's not too gameplay heavy, but there's a bit more going on from a gameplay standpoint in Deliver Us the Moon. You solve some basic puzzles. Like most of them are kind of push the box into the right place sort of puzzles, but still they count. You drive a buggy around a bit. It even rolls into a bit of kind of platforming by the end. So there's more going on from a gameplay standpoint. But yeah, they share a lot of DNA, those two games.
Yeah, I was going to say that these games are very similar, but I think Deliver Us the Moon kind of embraces the fact it's on the moon more than Tacoma did.
Yeah.
Tacoma kind of felt like it was begrudgingly in space, that it could have been done in the car park of my local Currys rather than in space. It didn't really need to be. Whereas Deliver Us the Moon really goes full wholeheartedly into its setting, and I like that. As you say, you get to drive moon buggies. You have an oxygen meter, which leads to you having desperate leaps to make it back into your safe space in time to not run out of air. You get to even pilot the rocket, which takes you to the moon in a very cool opening set piece. There's a lot of actual space stuff here, which I quite like. You get to float about a bit more. So it kind of embraces the setting a heck of a lot more than Tacoma did, and that's probably what makes it stand out more in a gameplay sense, even though I'd say its story is, I'd say it's a little bit weaker than Tacoma on the whole.
Yeah, I struggled with the story in this game, to be honest. It's one of those games where there's probably a story buried under there that's somewhat interesting, but the game insists on having you just read a bunch of stuff. They want you picking up big massive data pads with like paragraph after paragraph of dialogue between some characters, and I think if you read all that, you get the full idea of what happened here. But if you don't do that and you just kind of mainline through the game and well, yeah, play all the content that's actually there, you don't really get a lot of what happened. Everyone's gone, something bad happened, and you kind of know you need to fix it. But up until like the final hour of the game, they don't make a hell of a lot clear to you, really, to be honest. I mean, frankly, you could even argue that they don't make much clear until the last 10 minutes, really. But yeah, it's definitely the weakest aspect of this game. It's good that there's a lot of, interesting gameplay in this compared to those other spacey games to balance that out. Because, yeah, you're not going to stick with this one for the story.
Yeah, it kind of relies on the old tropes of it's kind of foregoing environmental storytelling, like a lot more of these kind of narrative-led games have been trying to recently, and falling back into the old tropes of here's a magazine detailing in great detail what your mission was all about, and here's a letter I conveniently left by my computer which lays out my entire motivations and all that sort of thing. And it's not exactly the most intuitive way of delivering the story. And it's probably not even the best way, because if you miss them and you don't pick everything up, then you're kind of just walking in the dark as to what's happening. Like, I mean, the thing that shocked me, and I'm hoping you could shine some lights on me here, is I played all the way through this game and I thought I was playing a woman called Claire. And in the last 5 minutes, I feel like I'm now playing a man called Rory, and I'm honestly not certain if I was or not. I don't even know if this is a spoiler. The story was so badly delivered to me that I don't know if this was a giant twist or I just completely blanked out for a part of the storytelling.
No, man. So I was pretty similar. I was playing through it, and yeah, the only people that really seemed to get mentioned that the only options I could find for who I could be for the most of the game was either this Claire person or literally just an unnamed person, just generic person who's came up to space. And then, yeah, you kind of, that's not the case at all. And this isn't the game trying to throw a twist at you. So as you said, you were worried about, could it be spoilers? I don't think it is. I just don't think they make it very clear. But yeah, you're actually that guy. I think he's called Rolf, actually. But yeah, you're Rolf. You're not Claire, and you are actually a person. But yeah, they just really don't make it clear. Maybe if I sat back and read about 50 pages of dialogue on someone's computer in the game, I might have understood that earlier. But I only really found that out when someone referred to me by name in about the last 3 minutes of the game. So that was that. Yeah, it's a strange one.
Yeah, that kind of sums up the storytelling of Deliver Us the Moon. It's a little bit jumbled, it's a little bit all over the place, considering it is trying to tell a story. And it's an interesting enough setup. We've ragged on how what's happened to these people in space has become its own genre, but it does it perfectly fine. Navigating the space station is pretty cool. It's got elements of tension, even though this is absolutely not a horror game, which is, I appreciated. I did think it was going to take a shit turn into the supernatural, and it kind of turns away from that, which I appreciate. All the things that happen are just general moon stuff, general
Yeah.
moon disasters, which could
Moon
befall
things.
anybody, which is kind of cool. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I guess I want to talk about, this is interesting because you'll have played this on an Xbox Series X, but
Yeah.
the thing that absolutely threw me when I played this on an Xbox One a while ago now, I played this about 6 months ago, was the movement speed of my character. Now, your character in this game plods along. Like, just like they can't even move. And I know they're in a spacesuit, so there's some, there's some narrative reasons as to why they can't move particularly quickly. But they move so slowly that it just becomes a slog to get anywhere. And worse yet, the camera speed is like a crawl. You push on the right stick to start turning your head, and it's like it's on a swivel, which somebody is slowly turning as humanly possible. And even when you bump up the camera sensitivity to like 10, it's still too slow. I don't know if you found it just begrudgingly painful as well.
Yeah, totally. So the thing with this game is that for a lot of the early going, it seems like it's going to be a first-person game mainly, which is, that's what all the other what happened to these people in space games are. So I was a bit like, oh, here we go again. And before long, it quickly does start to veer more towards third person, which is really good. I'm a big fan of that. And I think the third person stuff is kind of fine. But when I was playing the first person sections, and as you said, yeah, you've got your camera speed set to the default of 5. Like, I don't struggle with playing games in terms of like, I don't get headaches and things like that. I can play VR for ages and I don't have any issues. I was getting a headache from turning my head on this game because as you said, it moves so slowly that it's jarring and it just feels awful. And then even when you turn it up to the max, it speeds it up a little bit, but it's still too slow. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they were just really trying to like sell that, because in those sections you're largely in zero gravity, so it's like first person kind of flying, hovering around the station sort of stuff, and I don't know if they were just trying to really sell how clumsy the movement would be in that way, but you've got to find a balance between making it, you're making a game here. You got to find a way to get that impression off to the player without making it uncomfortable and clunky and slow because, I played the first hour of this and I was ready to just give up on it. If I didn't have to play it for the show this week, I would have just dropped it. But luckily I powered through. And as I said, I do think the rest of the game, as it gets into third person, it's a lot tighter. It's a lot more fun, frankly. But yeah, in terms of performance and stuff, I didn't have any performance issues with the game, but obviously I am on a Series X, so I'm sure that's going to kind of swallow up any performance issues that may have happened in the past. I was playing this on, there was 2 options. There was 4K 30 or 1080p 60, and I just went for the 60 frames because, well, yeah, I was already getting a headache at that camera, so I thought I might as well double the frame rate and try and help a bit. But yeah, there was no trouble with that on mine. But I feel like you played this on a Xbox One S, didn't you? And I think you had quite a lot of problems there.
Well, I played it on the One S. It wasn't problems in terms of, and the performance on the whole is perfectly fine. I just found that when I turned the camera speed up, and everybody will have to, that it kind of had some horrific slowdown, which only happened when I sped the camera sensitivity up. Almost like the reason the camera turned so slowly was to allow the game to load better. Because the minute it started to move faster, it just lagged like you couldn't believe. Like there was some dreadful slowdown at the highest camera sensitivity to the point where I had to knock it back down to like 8 because it was just chugging along. So it's almost like they hid slowdown behind a terribly slow character, which is kind of amusing. And to be fair, that's a clever fix.
It's creative, but
it's not the best way to do it. So if you are playing on a 1S, maybe they've patched it since then. But certainly when I played it, I found that it was a little bit choppy when you turn the camera sensitivity up. So that's amusing, but somewhat annoying as well. But look, this is a perfectly decent game. It's not a bad game by any stretch. I actually like the moon setting more on this game than most moon games I've played. It kind of gives you that wanderlust when you do get out on the moon surface on a buggy and it's just surrounded in pitch blackness and you're on the moon surface. That's cool, man. I enjoyed that. I thought that was decent. I liked that part of the game. But when it is trying to tell its more storytelling sort of stuff, it doesn't hit as well for me. It's serviceable. It's okay. It's not a bad game. It's short enough to, hold your attention. But I don't think people have to play this. I think if it's caught your eye, then you might as well because it's not particularly long. But I wouldn't call it an essential play at all. I'd probably I scored initially as a 6, but I've played much better 6s since. And I'm probably going to knock this down to a 5. I don't think it's an incredible game by any stretch.
Yeah, I think the problem with this game is that, it does, as I said, it plays better when it's in third person. There's a few fun set pieces. You kind of do a bit of space platforming in places. And as you said, you're kind of racing against an oxygen timer on your back for quite a bit of the game. That's all pretty good. I like all that. But when it's not that, it's not great. Basically, whenever you're just kind of slowly, methodically, like wandering around, listening to a bunch of audio logs and trying to take in this somewhat nonsensical story, it just doesn't really click. And again, it's kind of the problem with this game is that, I listed off those other what happened to these people in space games, and I think it's the worst one, sadly. Like Prey's on another level, frankly. Prey's a fantastic game. Do play Prey if you get a chance. Observation didn't massively click for me, but it has a really intriguing narrative. It's quite interesting, and you kind of play that whole game from the view of like cameras and stuff, which is a fun like sort of spin on it. So that's one to check out in Game Pass as well. And then Tacoma's left Game Pass, but it's narratively it was pretty interesting. It did some cool stuff with the way you kind of played back memories of people. You could like rewind and fast forward the scene and walk around and stuff. So they all kind of have a unique hook to them that I don't necessarily think Deliver Us the Moon has. So, I was similar to you in that when I was playing it, I was having a fine time, but you kind of put it up against its peers and it doesn't really stand up to them. So yeah, I'd be at a 5 for this as well, but that's, it's maybe slightly harsh. This isn't a bad game, and if you fancy putting 5 hours into it, you'll have an okay time.
Yeah, it's perfectly playable. Great title. Deliver Us the Moon. What a great title. I kind of wish I was delivering somebody the actual moon. that would have been a lot more fun. I wish I was like some form of supervillain lackey who's been told to scope out the moon for delivery. That would have been fantastic. But alas, we didn't get that. Instead, we move on to our next title, which is Gato Roboto. And you've made a note here which says this perhaps could be our most covered game in the entirety of this podcast.
Yeah, this has been pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I've made it quick because I know we've talked about it before, but I thought it was maybe just the one time. But yeah, I looked through and yeah, we covered this in episode 5. We did a lightning round on quick completions in Game Pass. We covered it in episode 23, where we did a series of recommendations on which games would be good with mobile gaming, like via xCloud. This would obviously be good for that because it's quite a retro kind of Game Boy looking game. And then we covered it again in episode 32 when we were helping people get quick gamer score to earn £10 worth of Microsoft reward money. So, we've covered it a lot. So you've definitely heard a lot of thoughts on this already. So I would say, if you want to get the full picture of Gato Roboto, maybe look back at some of our backlog there. But we'll definitely dig into it a little bit now as well. So yeah, Gato Roboto it's a very compact, very short Metroidvania experience. You basically play as a cat that gets in a robot mech suit. And yeah, over the course of, literally we're talking 2 hours, 3 hours if you want to find everything on the map. You're gonna go around, go to all these distinct different areas, get some power-ups that help you get into new areas in the other parts of the map, dig out some secrets, and that's your lot really. And it does a really good job for that. I love how short and compact this game is. I think it's it's the sort of thing you can literally pick up on an evening and you'll be done before you go to bed, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, this game is a perfectly enjoyable romp for the 3 to 4 hours that it lasts. It kind of feels like a Game Boy Metroid game, which is even cooler still if you're old enough like we are to remember playing Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. It's kind of got a cool little black and white art style to it. It looks nice enough. Playing as a cat is pretty fun. You don't get many games where you play as a cat until that Stray game comes out on PS5. So, it's got an interesting little hook to it as well, and it plays well. I mean, there's a lot of Metroidvanias in indie gaming these days, let's be honest. Yeah. You've got space, you've got dead parents, and if you can wrap it up in a Metroidvania style, you're onto a winner. And this game foregoes the dead parents, but goes heavily into the Metroidvania, and it's probably one of the better ones, to be fair, that I've actually played. I think the tight, compact world plays into its strengths. I like the fact that seemingly breaking down any bit of wall leads to a new power-up. There's a new power-up seemingly in every single screen. I like that. I like the fact that my health and my power points are just building up all the time. I'm becoming grossly overpowered very quickly. I like that a lot. It dishes out power-ups every 10 to 15 minutes as well. So it's got a real good momentum to it, a really quick pace to it, which I like quite a lot, which makes a change from many Metroidvanias which spend way too long getting you into that state of actual power. This game it doesn't even care that on the whole, it doesn't even care that you're just a cat. It gives you overpowered mech suit goodness instantly. And I like that. I think that's pretty cool. It has a slight misstep when it takes you out of the mech suit, and it has these sections where you have to just be the cat trying to navigate tight, kind of platformy kind of obstacles. And it's okay. It's not radically difficult, but it kind of breaks up the flow a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah, that's true. Because I think, if the kind of closest comparison, if we're going like for a Metroid game here, is that the cat is like when Samus goes into a morph ball, right? You're smaller but weaker, and you kind of roll through little areas to get to the next bit. But the issue with Gato Roboto is that, they actually then really do drag those cat sections out a bit. And, I mean, obviously keep in mind while we talk about this is still a 2 to 3 hour game. So when we say dragged out the cat section, we mean that, you might be the cat for 5 minutes at one point. It's not like you're spending 40 minutes playing as the cat, but, in such a short, compact game, those bits are the only bits where I don't know, you feel a bit of resistance, like the rest of the game, you're just racing through it. Like it's quite, just exhilarating, fast paced, because like you said, you're getting power ups every 10 seconds. You're fighting some boss. You're unlocking the new area every 20 minutes. It's all going on. But then the only bits where the brakes are pressed a bit is probably those cat sections. So, they tighten those up. And then realistically, there's very little wrong with this game.
Yeah, this is a very tight game and experience. It does very little wrong. Does not outstay its welcome, which we always appreciate on this show. Against all of the criteria of video games, not outstaying your welcome is probably our biggest tick box. And this game does not do that. It's got a good sense of humor. It's kind of funny. Your human character is just begging this cat to help him out because he's crashed and he needs the cat's help to survive. That's very cool. The actual image of the cat in the mech suit is adorable, and I love it. So there's just cool little stuff here. There's nice little boss fights, Some of them are a little bit trickier than others, but they're all well designed and all fun to do. Everything is over within 5 minutes. It comes up with a new idea. You do it. 10 minutes later, you're on to the next idea. And you've got another 29 power-ups. And it's good for that. The game is just constantly rocketing along. It's a sprightly game. It's quick on its feet. It's like a cat. It's nimble. It's fast and it's enjoyable. I'd recommend people play this. Incredibly enough, in a week where we've got massive AAA Square Enix, cover shooters and new 2D indie games and Moons. I'd say this is the best game that we're talking about this week. If I had to pick a game for people to play after this show, I'd say Gato Roboto. This is a damn good title.
Yeah, I got to agree, man. It's like you said, this is so short and compact that it doesn't waste any time. Like Outriders, I'm sure, is going to be a great game, for a lot of people, like people who like looter shooters and stuff, but it's a big bloated package. This has no bloat. You just, sit down on one evening and you'll be done before you wrap it up for the night. That's kind of great. So yeah, I agree with you. This would be my recommendation of the week, frankly. I think it's well worth everyone at least, even just put half an hour into it, by then, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But, by then you'll probably be into it enough that you'll think, well, I might as well put another 90 minutes in and wrap it up. So yeah, well worth a go.
Yeah, I'd give this a 7 out of 10. I think this is a very fun game. I'm looking forward to seeing what the dev team comes up with next. I hope they stick with cats in mech suits. I think that's a great concept for video games. It can be spread out to many more different things. Let's support that endeavor.
Yeah, that's fair. I gave this a 7 as well. And, maybe to go into an indie trope we talked about last week, maybe for the next game, they'll spin the roulette wheel of animals and they'll decide on a new indie animal for the next game. So it'll be like a crocodile in a mech suit or something. But yeah, we'll see. But yeah, good stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing more from them for sure. All right, then. So it's time for our feature of the week. And for this week, we're going back to the cloud. So as we briefly said in our Gato Roboto review, we had a feature in episode 23 where we gave some recommendations on cloud gaming. And obviously this week, one of the big news stories has been that Xbox 360 and original Xbox backwards compatible games are now available in the cloud. So there's 16 games in there so far. So we thought we'd run down each game, kind of talk about, if it's worth checking out. And then also maybe have a quick discussion on if it's worth checking out via the cloud gaming experience on mobile, or if it's something you should maybe play on a big TV. So let's open that up with the first game alphabetically here, which is Banjo-Kazooie. So yeah, what are your thoughts on old Banjo, Josh?
I think old Banjo's not too bad, actually. I'd never played it on the N64, so I came to Banjo-Kazooie about a year ago, completely devoid of any nostalgia, expecting to hate it. And actually, I think it's pretty good. This is a pretty decent game. This is an enjoyable collectathon 3D platformer, which, despite aging slightly ungraciously in certain areas, is on the whole still pretty playable by today's standards. Good central characters, good sense of humor, enjoyable level design, a lot to like in Banjo-Kazooie, and I'd actually say cloud-based Kazooie, yeah, I think you could play this game on a phone. I don't think you necessarily need a giant screen to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. You know, Banjo-Kazooie, it's kind of from that golden era of 3D platformers when they were just starting out and you got your Mario 64s and stuff like this. And yeah, I think it's aged pretty well, to be honest. I played some of it in the N64 era, but didn't really stick with it. And then I completed everything on it when it came to Xbox 360. And yeah, it's a fun game. There's a lot of kind of fun, clever worlds to explore. There's a lot more kind of room for really needing to like dig into the worlds, I think. You know, Mario 64, I mean, entirely on purpose, makes things quite straightforward in a way. You know, you kind of get a feel for where you need to go and what you need to do. Whereas Banjo-Kazooie kind of requires you to like look a bit deeper and maybe, if you get a power up that changes your character to a different type of character, you kind of then have another look around and see if there's something you can do now that you couldn't do before, stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's a really fun game to go back and complete even today. And I think it's a great fit for cloud gaming because I think, when I'm playing on my phone or something, I kind of want something that I can pick up and play. Maybe I'm going to play for 10 minutes. Maybe I'm going to play for an hour. So I like the idea that with a game like this, you can jump in, collect a couple of they're basically jigsaw pieces in this game, but think of them as stars of you from the kind of Mario world. But yeah, maybe you're going to collect one and then turn it off. Maybe you're going to sit there for a while and collect five. But I think it's a great fit for cloud gaming and a great game.
Stupid quiz, though. Hate that quiz.
Yeah,
hate the end of game quiz.
Yeah, they have a strange obsession with quizzes for some reason. That's stuck right through to the remainders of this team that are working on Yooka-Laylee as well. That has quizzes in it because they just love a quiz. I don't know.
God, not for me. Okay, so what's your next one? We got Banjo-Tooie. So this was the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie. Pretty much the same game, but everything was bigger. There was more to collect, more of everything, essentially. I played a little bit of Banjo-Tooie. I've kind of fell quickly off it because I did find it too big, trying to make me do too much. It kind of went too far in supersizing itself. I don't enjoy it as much as Banjo-Kazooie. I will say, though, that it's exactly the same experience, so you can play it on a phone, backwards compatible via the cloud just as easily. I just think it's a weaker title in the actual series.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you look through the games that Rare made back then, there's obviously Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and then they did Donkey Kong 64, which goes insanely too far with the amount of collectibles in it. Like Banjo-Tooie stretches the limit a bit to the point where it's not quite as tight a game as Kazooie is, but it is still a very good game. And one thing I do like about Banjo-Tooie is it basically, like in Banjo-Kazooie, you get new power-ups as you go through the game, new abilities to use that Banjo and Kazooie can use together to get around the world. In Banjo-Tooie, you actually start the sequel with all of those moves, and then this game just gives you a whole new set of moves as you go through it. So I like that. I always think it's a bit tedious when, you play a sequel and all of a sudden your characters forgot how to jump. So nice that this just lets you keep everything. And yeah, I mean, I'm actually playing this via xCloud now. This is the game I've chosen from this list to play. So I've started booting up a bit of Banjo-Tooie before I go to bed. Just boot it up on my phone and kind of play for 20 minutes. And yeah, it's a great fit for that, just like Banjo-Kazooie is. So I would say, obviously, if you've not played either of them, definitely start with Kazooie. That's the tighter experience on the original game. But if you want to dip into the sequel and you've already played that one, xCloud's a good way to do it.
Absolutely. How do you feel about the next game added, which was Double Dragon Neon, a side-scrolling beat-em-up, I think released back in about 2011. It could have been even earlier. It could have been as early as like 2006. This game is in a time hole for me. It just disappears into a big void of space. This is a perfectly serviceable throwback to the old beat-em-ups of old. I don't think it's exactly essential gaming, but it's pretty playable. It's got some really good music, some pretty fun moves occasionally, a decent enough sense of humor. It probably feels a little janky. It doesn't feel as smooth to play as like a Streets of Rage game, for example, but it's serviceable stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing with Double Dragon Neon. It's like, as you said, it came out in about 2011, 2012, but it plays like an earlier arcade title, and it's a little bit janky. It's a little bit rough around the edges. it almost looks a bit too low budget and stuff. And yeah, it's fine for a serviceable, side scroll and beat 'em up like your Streets of Rages and stuff like that. But in fairness, you can actually play Streets of Rage 4 via xCloud anyway, or via the game streaming. So there's very little reason to jump back into 2012 Double Dragon Neon when you can just play Streets of Rage 4, which is a much more fully featured, much better game, fantastically designed game. So yeah, I don't know. If you really need an itch for a new side scroll and beat 'em up, give it a shot. It's going to play perfectly fine on xCloud for one thing. This is, again, it's just it's a kind of small arcade game. This would have always been fine on a smaller screen, really. There's not a ton of detail in the distance that you're going to miss if you're playing on a littler screen. So yeah, it fits fine, but there's better options.
Yeah, there's better options, exactly. It also, you've reminded me, I spoke about the Narita Boy end game karaoke song being fantastic. This game also has a fantastic end of game karaoke song with like the Skeletor standing, kind of like hops in to do his little number. It's a good song, actually. I might listen to that once this is finished.
Yeah. It's also this is also a game that screws you over with a 1-point achievement when you start the game, and they only give you the other, like, I think they bounce it out with like a 99.1 when you beat the boss at the end. Like, but I think the skeleton character in the game actually laughs at you for the fact he's gave you the 1 achievement point. So that's fun. That's clever.
Kind of love that. Let's move on to our next title, Fable 2. Now, this is a storied old famous Xbox franchise which has somehow gone completely dead until news of Playground Games' remake or, reboot, essentially, of the series will come out in a couple of years' time. This was probably the most successful one. It's fair to say there's a lot of hype around this game, mainly all started by Peter Molyneux, who delivered on about 20% of the promises he made for it. It's a perfectly serviceable Western RPG. It's very easy to play. It's very enjoyable in that sense. I don't care for the Fable franchise. I never really have done. I think they're fairly boring games. But this one's probably the best of the 3. So if you did want to play a Fable game, this is the one I'd pick. Yeah, I imagine you could actually play this pretty well on a phone as well. I don't think there's any hugely complex menus which you're going to have to start squinting at. Most of it is on the screen and all playable.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I have a real soft spot for Fable 2. When this game came out, I played it for about 10 hours a day for a couple of weeks until I'd completely exhausted it of content. So, it's probably aged a bit now, but I do think it's Fable at its best. This game nailed the kind of setting. It's got that kind of, dopey, like Middle England kind of fantasy stuff going on with it. It's whereas Fable 3 went a bit too far with Industrial Revolution stuff that kind of muddied the fun of what Fable should be. So yeah, I think it's Fable still at its best. This is the best you're going to get today for it. It's a fun adventure. There's a lot of good humor in there. And yeah, like a lot of the menus in Fable have always been quite big on the screen, like they don't have a lot of tiny text everywhere. It's usually stuff just popping up right in front of the screen. So I think that stuff will be fine on mobile. It's probably not perfect, but it should do the job. And, with these games being a bit dated as well, I imagine if you boot something like a Fable 2 up on a massive 4K screen, it's probably going to show a few artifacts now. Whereas if you look at it on a mobile, it's probably still going to look pretty beautiful. So yeah, I think it's a great game for its time. Might have aged a bit, but I'd check it out if you have an interest in, kind of Western RPGs. I think there's some good stuff in there.
It's perfectly okay. Let's move on to our next title, Fallout New Vegas. I would not play this on a phone. This is too big, too many systems, too many menus. Also, the fact that you're streaming it kind of means that the jankiness which is inherent in all Bethesda published games could really come to the forefront here if you have any form of lag on the experience. I wouldn't set this one up for cloud gaming, though the game itself is pretty damn good.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, New Vegas is for me the best Fallout game. We were obviously very, very generous to New Vegas in our big Bethesda special just a couple of weeks ago because it's fantastic. But I have no interest in trying to play this on a phone. I mean, this game is full of menus with small text, full of different weapons with tiny different stat changes that you'd have to be staring at. Like, you're gonna have to stare into the very soul of your phone screen to try and figure out what's going on in this game. There's a ton of dialogue boxes to read. It's not suitable for a mobile. I mean, even if, because in my experience, xCloud, or I think they've renamed it to game streaming, but I'm going to keep calling it xCloud. In my experience, if you want a reliable internet connection, it's really solid. Like you get basically no stuttering at all. But even so, New Vegas is not something where I want to risk introducing any extra jank to it. And also, I don't want to like just for example, let's say your internet cuts out at home, right? If I'm streaming New Vegas, I assume the game is just going to shut straight down, and then I'm going to lose progress because I haven't been able to save it. Whereas if you're playing something a bit smaller, a bit snappier, it's probably going to be auto saving every 20 seconds anyway. So I just wouldn't want to risk trying to play New Vegas in a mobile streaming setting. Simply enough.
Yeah, I think we can both agree on that one. Let's move on to our next title, Gears of War 2. Not Gears of War 1 for reasons beyond my understanding, but Gears of War 2. Now, I will go out on the line here and say that the original Gears of War trilogy is actually one of the best series of games from the last console generation. I think their legacy and reputation has been harshly diminished over the past decade or so, for no good reason, because these games play exemplarily. They're just a delight to play. It's one of the best cover shooter ever made, remains to this day. Nothing has improved upon it. Does that mean I would play Gears of War 2, the best one in the series, on a phone? You could. I think it's playable. I don't think it's undoable, but I don't know if it's the best way to play, because these games still look good, man. I'd want to be playing this on a big screen.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, in terms of Gears 1 missing, so I had a quick look up, and you can play the Ultimate Edition on phones. So you can get your Gears 1 fix, but it's the Ultimate Edition remaster rather than the Xbox 360 original. So kind of weird. It would have been nice if they could just add the original in anyway. But yeah, if you wanted to run the whole series on phone, it is possible. Yeah, I agree with you as well. The Gears trilogy, the original three, they still stand up today, which it's something we've spoke about quite a bit, which is that shooting games from older kind of eras usually have a real problem with age. Like you try and play an old Battlefield from the 360 or a Call of Duty, and look, they're first person games. It's a little different, but they are rough now. Whereas Gears of War, you can jump into these old Gears games and it's still pretty much as tight as you're going to get in the modern games, because no one's really found a way to improve on it much. So yeah, fantastic games. I'd strongly recommend going back to play the trilogy, but I'm not convinced about playing these on a mobile unless you've got a pretty big screen. Maybe you're streaming to a tablet rather than a mobile, because I don't know. There's a lot of times in Gears where you're pinning down like locusts that are quite far away, and you're shifting through cover to get the right angles on people. And I don't know, if you're on a small screen, you're going to struggle to see all the detail of who's in the distance there. So it could be a little tricky, but it's doable if that's your kind of best way of playing them.
Exactly. Gears of War 3 has been added as well. Same thoughts as before. I don't like Gears of War 3 as much as the first two. I think it's the weakest in the trilogy, even though it's still a very good game and a satisfying end to the story. Just a quick opportunity for me to talk even more about why I like Gears of War. The main reason being that you control a giant slab of meat. You're against giant slabs of meat. And the sound of bullets going into said meat is to this day one of my favorite things in gaming. The locust enemy types just absorb bullets in the most satisfyingly fuddy way that you can't even imagine how great it is. And then you get to saw them in half with a chainsaw. And it's just preposterously entertaining. Even better still, that thud you make as you slide into cover in Gears of War, especially after you've done a roadie run, is just top tier game design. I love it. It feels so mechanically satisfying. I wish all games did it. That foot into the wall. My God, I love that.
Yeah, fantastic sound design, fantastic like camera work of the way it kind of, you feel the force of that movement. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And I would say as well, yeah, I totally agree on the the way that the locust absorb bullets in these games. Like, we're just taking a chance here to tell you all why Gears are so great, but it's tricky because in other games, if enemies absorbed as many bullets as the locusts do, it would feel awful. Like you'd start to feel like it was a bit bullet spongy. And I hate games where it feels like you shoot someone and nothing happens. Whereas Gears, you kind of do shoot quite a lot of bullets into these guys, but every bullet feels like it hurts them. You feel the sounds, you feel the kind of pain and anguish, and it just works. Like, I never feel like somebody takes too long to go down in a Gears game. They're big, horrible alien meat men. They're going to take some damage. So yeah, again, Gears is awesome. Gears 3 is a good game, not as good as Gears 2, but it's still really good. Again, I'd probably be looking to play these on a big TV though.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the Gears of War spin-off Judgment. Now, we mentioned actually about the Outrider devs, People Can Fly, made this game, and they put their own spin on the formula. This is a more arcadey version of Gears of War. It encourages score chasing, even though I don't necessarily think Gears lends itself to that too well. But this is a perfectly enjoyable game. It feels slightly inconsequential. It doesn't really feel like it needs to exist, but it captures still that feeling of bullets in meat, which is what I want from Gears of War. That is Gears of War to me. You could rename that title Bullets in Meat, and I would just buy it for that. And yeah, this is another good version of that, but I'm not as keen on the arcadey kind of styles on this. And in many ways, that might actually make this more lended to cloud gaming, because it is very arcade. You can pick up a level, try to beat a high score, and move on. So of all the Gears series, I'd say this is the most cloud-friendly, even though I still don't necessarily think you should play it on it.
Yeah, that's very fair. I mean, I quite like Judgment. It's like you said, it's pretty inconsequential. The game takes place basically over it's Baird, one of the characters from the trilogy. He's on trial, and the game's kind of recapping why he's on trial and what happened. And it's a fine side story, but it has no impact on anything else that happens in the Gears of War world. One thing I do like that they do in this game is they let you pick more challenging things to come ahead, and they frame it in the story by kind of Baird explaining what happened in the courtroom. And I think that's clever. That's I like that they lean into the fact that they kind of, they couldn't do that sort of stuff in the main trilogy, because that's too much of a focused kind of cinematic experience that they're trying to deliver. Whereas, like People Can Fly have clearly just gone off the beaten path a bit with this one and injected a bit of fun into it. So yeah, I think, if you're a Gears fan, there's no reason to miss Judgment. You might as well play it. But it's not a necessary playthrough.
Absolutely. Next title is Rare's Jetpack Refueled. Speaking of unnecessary titles, I do not care for this game at all. This is an old arcade kind of like, how would you even describe it? It's basically a shooter, but you just have to collect parts for your rocket to build it so you can fly to the next stage. It's every bit as boring as that sounds. It feels like dated game design, which for some unbeknownst reason they decided people needed a HD scene of. Despite the fact, if you loved Jetpack that much, I'm pretty certain you could still play the old game and get whatever fun you could out of that. Look, it's a perfectly serviceable remaster. They've given some touch controls to this one. Couldn't think of a worse experience in my life than trying to play Jetpack Refueled with touch controls, because it's bloody difficult even with a controller. But, it's an arcade chasing kind of game. It's a level-based title, so if it is more suited to on-the-go play, I just don't think it's a particularly good game.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. Jetpack Refueled is a game from that early era of Xbox 360 arcade games where, like, people didn't quite know what to do with the service yet. So you got a few companies that would just be like, well, we made this kind of shitty arcade game in the 80s. Let's put HD on it and bring it back out. And that's what Jetpack is. I mean, Jetpack was a pretty tedious arcade game even when it came out, but because it was, such an early game, it got a bit of fanfare back then. But you don't really do anything in Jetpack Refueled. Like you said, you fly around a little screen, picking up parts of your ship, picking up fuel for your ship to fill it up, and then you fly to the next map. And while doing that, some incredibly annoying enemies that move in all kinds of mad directions that you can't really track will just fly into you and kill you. And if you want to, there's about something stupid like 150 levels of it in Jetpack Refueled. If you manage to bring yourself to play all of those, then I don't know, it might be time to just do something else with your life at that point, I guess, because I don't know, there's better things to be doing, guys. But yeah, look, kind of suited for cloud gaming, but just not worth playing, frankly.
Yeah, would not recommend it. Cameo is our next game up, another Rare title. I've not played this, I've not touched it, I'm not even certain what it is. So why don't you tell me whether this is worth playing or not?
You're right. Okay, Cameo was an Xbox 360 launch title. So I played this when the Xbox 360 launched, which was about 16 years ago. So I will try my best to cover this. Cameo is really cool, to be fair. This was a game where you kind of, you played as a wizard person, and she could change herself into all these kind of wacky different monsters. So there was like a plant that had boxing gloves and could fight people, or she could become a big yeti that would like roll into a ball. And yeah, you'd kind of just go around, do basic kind of action adventure stuff. Elements of Zelda, but more combat focused than puzzle solving. And look, it was a good game for its time. I think when it came out, probably like a solid 7 out of 10 game. It didn't get a ton of fanfare, but it was a fun little launch title exclusive game for the Xbox 360. I can't speak too much to how it's aged at this point, so it's really tough to know if it's definitely worth checking out. But it's kind of Rare being Rare. Like Rare got moved to weird, crappy Connect games not long after this, and now they're on Sea of Thieves, which some people like, but it's not really very them, I don't think. Whereas as Cameo, you can almost see elements of like Banjo DNA in it. It does have a bit of their personality and style to it. So I think it's an interesting little relic. It might be worth digging out to take a look at. I think it'll work perfectly fine on cloud, unlike cloud stuff. I think any size screen will be fine for this game. Most of it, your character's pretty big in the front of the screen. Most of the stuff you need to interact with, you're going to be running right up to it. So there's no action kind of reasons why you'd need to see stuff miles away. So yeah, might be worth a look if you feel like, digging into the past a bit and seeing if it's worth going on. But I can't give any real up-to-date impressions on how it plays today.
Absolutely. Okay, Perfect Dark, sci-fi set, future kind of shooter way back in the 90s, pushed the genre forward, did some pretty freaky things with 3D graphics in a time when they weren't the commonplace. Very important title, a game you blasphemously once described as better than Doom. And I sincerely hope you're going, it wasn't better than Doom. It was more, it pushed the genre forward, but that does not make it better. But nonetheless, let's look into the Doom debate. Let's talk about Perfect Dark. I've played this recently, actually, because I wanted to see just how incredulous your claim was. And it is a fun game. Perfect Dark is a good video game. It's an enjoyable first-person shooter back in a time where this sort of stuff was pretty cutting edge and pretty crazy. It has some fantastic level design and mission design where, depending on the difficulty, more objectives need to be fulfilled. It has a cool story going to a good sense of humor. There's a lot to like in Perfect Dark. It's a damn good game. It's aged undeniably. All 3D shooters of this type have aged. I'd say this has aged more gracefully than most FPSs from this time, though. I think this is still playable now.
Yeah, and I agree with that massively. I think the level design carries this through, like throughout the story in this, because you're a spy, you're Joanna Dark. You go to all kinds of different areas. There's a lot of missions with different focuses. Like some of them are more stealth based. Other ones are just straight up run and gun shooters. Other ones you might be doing a bit of kind of investigation, and then it'll all blow up into a big battle. There's a lot of clever design in there. The way they do more objectives as you go up in difficulty, really clever, really good stuff. And to be honest as well, it's even infinitely more playable in this version because the N64 was an awful console to try and play first-person shooters because there was only one analog stick. So whenever you wanted to aim, you had to hold an aim button in, which would force you to stand still. And then you'd use that one analog stick to aim your cursor at people. Whereas now you've just got twin stick controls, moving with the left and aiming with the right sort of stuff, like on any other shooting game. So much easier to play now. I would say that makes the AI look horrendous because, this is an old game, but also the AI had to be a bit clumsy because the player's controller was clumsy. Whereas now your controls aren't clumsy. So like you can just aim and shoot at a man in an instant, and he's taking about 15 seconds to slowly put his gun in front of him before he shoots you because, they had to balance it for the controls that existed at the time. So yeah, it's definitely a relic of the past. As I said long ago, the day this came out, it was the best shooter you could get on the market at the time because it took all of the latest technology and pushed the genre forward in a really clever way. A lot of games that came out at the same time are largely unplayable now, but I think Perfect Dark actually does remain playable because of that level design. I really do think this is worth a look. I think there's some fun stuff in there. There's some crazy extra modes as well. Like this has a counter-operative mode where you play the story missions, but a second player just can constantly respawn as enemies and just come back at you and try and stop you doing the mission. Really clever. We should be seeing more of that in games, frankly. I think that's awesome. And yeah, I think it's good for cloud gaming as well, because this is a pretty old game. So it's not like there's, they couldn't do a ton of detail, frankly, on the N64. So you ain't going to be missing much in the distance. It's all going to be there in front of you. And it kind of pops, the HD remake pops quite well. It's quite colorful and bright. And I think that'll look good on a mobile screen. So it's one I'd recommend.
Yeah, it's well worth a play as Perfect Dark, despite its age. I'll tell you what isn't worth a play. Perfect Dark Zero. Now, this is not exactly the sequel to Perfect Dark that people were looking out for. This was an Xbox 360 launch title, pretty much. If it wasn't out on day one, it was very much within the window. And it disappointed a lot of people, to say the least. It didn't seem to capture the spirit of the original game. Is it any worth playing now, I'd probably say no. I think there's significantly better first-person shooters you can play on Game Pass, which will be cloud-enabled than this game. But if you're a perfect dark completionist, and that's a bizarre thing to describe yourself as, but if you are that, then you probably will have to give it a go.
Yeah, I mean, Perfect Dark Zero looked very nice on launch day when it came out for the Xbox 360. It was a very pretty game. It had a good multiplayer suite. The online multiplayer in this game was really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. The issue is that the single player campaign is disappointing. It's poor. It throws away a lot of that good level design from the original Perfect Dark. This doesn't have kind of big levels with branching paths depending on difficulties and different objectives to do. It's kind of pretty paint by numbers first person shooter. For whatever reason, it completely drops the character of Joanna Dark, frankly. Like in the first Perfect Dark game, she's very much, female James Bond. Like she's British. She's kind of like she's kind of doing like wisecracks as she goes, and she's quite like, just very confident. Whereas you go to this game and she's American now for some reason, for starters, and she just isn't that character. There's nothing about her that is the same character. And then you look at the recent very brief teaser trailer for the new Perfect Dark, and you can clearly see that they're throwing this game in the bin. It's going to be a game based on the original Perfect Dark, because why wouldn't it be? Why would you stick with this weird alternate universe version of Perfect Dark that Zero was? I don't know. It's one of those ones where it's a bit of a weird curiosity, right? It's a strange sequel to a revered game, and it's a kind of odd little 360 launch title. It's something to look at out of curiosity. It's not something to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bundle our next two games together because they're fairly similar in many ways. Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind and Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Very cool that these games are now streamable on the phone. These are big, giant, big boy RPGs, so it's very cool. You can stream this over the cloud to your phone. Would I necessarily? I suppose you could. I guess they're not unplayable, but these are very menu-heavy games as well as they were. I mean, Morrowind is barely playable by today's standards. By anybody's standards, let alone on a phone, when you'd be using the phone to find out where you need to go. So that's not going to work.
You'd have to just pause the game constantly and try and quickly look up some stuff before the game goes to sleep on the server. But look, I mean, we spoke about both of these on the Bethesda special a couple of weeks ago. I think Morrowind has aged too badly to be picked up now by anyone except for people who enjoyed it at the time, or someone who's really committed, because it takes a lot of time to get past the fact that it's just real old, man. It's real old. So wouldn't be looking to play that on a phone for sure. Oblivion, I think, is a fantastic game, but again, it's a game full of menus and text and all kinds of stuff that you need to read, and that's just not ideal for a phone. So it's not a game I'd pick for playing on a mobile, but I would say give Oblivion a go on your console. But then again, at the same time, if you're already a big fan of Oblivion, because I have tried Oblivion via xCloud, like I think it's good for people like me who already know and love that game, because it just gives you a new way to pop in and experience it. But I'd never tell someone to play it that way for a first time through. I think it's too big. You're gonna miss a lot of what makes that game great if you try and play it on a tiny screen. And again, it's that saving issue I spoke about earlier in New Vegas as well. Like this is a game where you're not going to be saving it every few minutes. You're going to be kind of, doing a big save every now and then, or when you go to a new area, it'll auto save. So I just have a few too many worries about if my internet cuts out or something. I don't want to lose that data. So I wouldn't be saying play this on phone.
Yeah, and the whole point of these games is that big moment where you see the vast open world in front of you. You need a TV for that, even though you see that vast open world and, oh God, it's an Elder Scrolls game. So you're trapped into it being that. But nonetheless, if you do love these titles, you want to play them on a TV. You don't want it on a tiny screen. I tell you, you can play on a tiny screen. And what you should absolutely be playing anyway is the next two titles, the Viva Pinata games, both Viva Pinata and Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise. I love this series. This is the last good game that Rare ever made. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorite. It's almost like a park game, but it's not really. It's almost like a Zoo Tycoon, but you've got these cute little pinata animals, so you're trying to make breeds so you can make more and make a bigger and better garden for them all to play in. And it's just gloriously colorful, gloriously weird, and just enjoyable in every sense of the word. And they've even gone the extra step of adding touch controls to this, which I think is really cool. They've actually put the extra added work in to make this even more playable on the phone. Do the touch controls work? I know you've given it a go.
Yeah, I mean, the touch controls are fine if they're your only option, I would say, but they're pretty basic touch controls. We're talking on-screen buttons, basically. You can see the face buttons from an Xbox controller on your phone screen, and you press those to press those buttons. It's all pretty simple. There's a couple of extra things, like there's individual touch bits to sort of zoom in and out on the camera, or to spin the camera around. That's all a bit more natural than trying to move like an analog stick on the phone screen. But it's far from the ideal way to play it. But I would say, like, look, this whole tech that Microsoft are working on, it's pretty awesome, right? I mean, they're adding touch controls to an Xbox 360 game that I can now stream to my phone. Like, there's so many hoops that they're jumping through to get these things working in the first place, that any touch-enabled controls on these backwards compatible titles is kind of a miracle. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, look, Viva Pinata is fantastic. It's one of those games where you kind of have to power through it first, because you're going to put this on and think this game was made for 4-year-olds. Like, it feels like you're watching a children's TV channel. It's all very, very bright and colorful, and all the characters talk to you as if they're like a presenter from CBBC or something. But then under that is actually a fairly hardcore kind of animal management sim game. Like, you've got all these different pinatas, which are your animals, and you have to satisfy specific requirements to make them come to your garden and for them to live there. And then there's even more requirements for them to actually like mate and make more of their kind. This evil principal man comes in every now and then and literally murders them, which is the most soul crushing experience you're ever going to have. Like, he just comes in and just stoves their head in, and then they're dead. So that's rough. Yeah, this is a serious game, but also just incredibly lovely and chilled out. And I would massively recommend people check these out. Definitely.
Yeah, these are really good games. Can't recommend Viva Pinata enough. Really underrated franchise. Love to see it come back. I wish they were working on this game rather than whatever that crap. What's that naff game they're working on called?
So harsh. You hate Rare so much. They're working on Everwild. We don't really know what it is yet, but it looks kind of cool.
Oh, it looks bloody naff, doesn't it? That should be a Viva Pinata game. That's what that should be.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. If you gave me a choice of Everwild or Viva Pinata free and like Banjo free, I'm taking it. I'd rather have those two than whatever Everwild is. But still, they're doing decent work. All right, then. So let's wrap up this week's show with a bit of news. And I guess this news kind of goes quite well with our feature of the week this week, because you've got Microsoft giving you original Xbox titles and Xbox 360 titles in the cloud, so you can play those anywhere now, which is lovely. And then on the other hand, you've got Sony, who are they finally confirmed the complete shutdown of their stores for the PSP, the PS Vita, and the PS3 this week. So yeah, it's going to be a rough time for people who are trying to get the most out of those retro Sony consoles at this point. You're looking at July 2nd for the PS3 store, and kind of also the PSP. The PSP is a bit of a tricky one, though, because you can only buy PSP games now through the other two consoles. So they actually closed the PSP's store a while ago, and they quietly closed the web browser store as well last week. That's just gone now, and that was the best remaining way to buy PSP games. So your only hope for buying PSP games now is to go on the Vita store. And a lot of games work on both the Vita and the PSP. So you can actually still buy those games there, or you can use a PS3 for now until July 2nd. And you can get a few PSP games on there, but that's mainly just going to be the PlayStation 1 classics, because they work again on PlayStation 3 and PSP. So it's July 2nd for PS3 and PSP, and August 27th for the PlayStation Vita. From those dates, you won't be able to buy any new games. The good news to some extent is that they're saying you'll be able to re-download games you've bought after those dates. But of course, we have no word on when that extends to. There will be an end to that. There just will be. So it's I'd say if you've got these consoles and you want some games on them, I'd be buying them real soon. But I'd also be even just booting up your old consoles and re-downloading games that you already own, because we don't know. It could be a few months or it could be a year or two before they stop you even downloading stuff you own there. So it's tough times, and it's a bit of a bad luck compared to the week Xbox is having, where you can stream 19-year-old Morrowind to a mobile phone. It's not a great week for comparisons.
Well, Sony, for whatever reason, seems to have just this strange disdain for their back catalogue. Yeah. And I have absolutely no reason why. Nintendo almost has it to a lesser extent, but it has it where it has any disdain for any game made after the SNES. Anything after that can just die in a
that's
ditch
true.
up until the Wii U, and they'll charge you $60 for it. Everything in that gap could just die. Sony just doesn't care about anything from its PS1, PS2, and PS3 era. You'll never see anything downloadable on their storefronts on PS4 and PS5. And this is just mind-bogglingly weird of all the companies to have a very positive approach to their back library. And I mean this with no disrespect to Microsoft. The one I'd care about least is Microsoft. Not that they're bad games, but there's not exactly many stone cold absolute classics on them. It's still a relatively young company. You know, it's only been in the game 20 years.
No, that's true.
These games, PlayStation and Nintendo just refuse to sell me stuff I want to buy off them. And it's utterly baffling. Why am I having to change out my PS3's hard drive for like a 500 gigabyte version of one so I can spend about £100 on old PS1 games? Because they won't sell me them after a certain date. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it is crazy. And I do agree as well. You know, look, I mean, the work and money that Microsoft have put into, you know, making sure their kind of backwards compatible infrastructure is in place now it's awesome. It's fantastic. And it's going to serve them really well in the sort of next decade or so, as you know, as they do grow into an older company and they have this backlog of great games, and that's going to be fantastic. But like you said, man, if you gave me the option to pick either Sony or Nintendo to have this Microsoft approach, I'd pick one of those instead. You know, just booting up any N64 games or SNES games instantly onto my phone, or having full backwards compatibility on the PS5 with PS1, 2, 3 games. Like, just yes, please. You know, I want that, and they just have this absolute disdain for it. I mean, the president of Sony's, well, of PlayStation, he's come out quite a few times now and basically just said that he doesn't think gamers care about playing old titles. Basically, that's why they're not leaning into it. And I don't know, man. I think, you know, you see all the goodwill Microsoft get for this stuff. You know, even if Sony believes that the numbers don't stack up, you know, even if they believe that, you know, people don't spend that many hours playing the classic content when they do release it, just that goodwill and getting your company's name out there as someone who's, you know, you're going to let people keep access to all their purchases from decades ago, and you're going to really support them and let them continue to enjoy that content. Like, the messaging alone is worth it, surely. Like, that's the key here. Like, it doesn't matter that people load up, I don't know, friggin' Ark the Lad on PS1 for half an hour and then don't play it again. That's not the point. The point is that it makes you look good. So I just think this is all crazy. And yeah, I'm the same as you, man. I'm gonna have to dig out these old Sony consoles and just run rampant on the storefronts for the next few months and spend way too much money, frankly, because they refuse to put any sales on as well. Like, there's not been a sale on these storefronts for about 2 years now, and there's no sign they're going to do one now. So anything you want to buy off, you know, you're going to be paying, like, if you want any digital PS Vita games, you're going to be paying like 30, 40 quid for them. And I dread to think how much PS3 titles might cost. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, the saving grace is that the PS1 classics were always incredibly fairly priced. So I'll be picking up a ton of those. Most of those only cost £4 or up to £8 for a few titles. So yeah, I'll be getting lots of them, but this is still a real disappointment.
It's a real shame. I mean, I still play my PS Vita pretty regularly to this day. It's a fantastic console. Games for that console had never been particularly cheap because it wasn't wonderfully supported. It didn't sell particularly well. So there's a natural scarcity to some of the titles. For example, if you want to play the PS Vita's best game, which is obviously Persona 4 Golden, if you want to buy a boxed version of that, you're already looking at like a 40, 50 quid purchase. That boxed version does not go cheap. Yet the digital version is available for about £8. For some unbeknownst reason, it's dead cheap on the digital storefront. So, you know, some of these games, and there's a lot of them like that. For example, the Trails of Cold Steel series is a bit cheaper online than it is to buy in person. Certainly, it's the same for the East series and all sorts of different game series. Steins Gate is much cheaper on the digital storefront than to buy them physically. And the physical market's going to go mad for the Vita now. If you do want to put one together, I've bought about 10 PS Vita games this past week because I know they're going to just skyrocket up once that storefront is completely shut. And that is it. All the copies that are out there are the ones that are out there. You know, so it's going to go mad. So it's a real shame that I'm being kind of forced into purchases that I've happily put off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then it's not too dissimilar with the PSP as well. There's some physical PSP games that are upwards of like 60, 70 pounds, but then they're available on the storefront for like £12.99. So yeah, I would just say anyone who has even a passing interest right now, if you think that at some point in the near future you might want to be checking out these games, now is the time to do your research, because there might be some games on that digital storefront that will save you about 60-70 pounds compared to trying to get a physical version, and that's savings that are only going to exist for about 2 or 3 more months now. So it's now's the time to just buy a ton of retro Sony stuff.
Now's the time to buy all the Ark the Lad games. God, I can't wait to play the Ark the Lad series. I never will, but I really want to. That's a franchise I'm all in on.
I mean, I've honestly, because those games are like, they're always near the top of the PS1 Classics alphabetical order list. So I've skipped past Ark the Lad, being like, should I buy Ark the Lad for about? I mean, honestly, over a decade now, probably. I just always go past it going, I could buy Ark the Lad, and then I'm totally going to. I'm going to have to buy Ark the Lad. It's going to happen. So join us in a few months for beat the Ark the Lad, I guess, and we'll see how we get on. Nearly said beat the lad, decided against it, but I'm glad you've gone for it.
I am no shame.
But yeah, look, I mean, that's pretty much all the news this week. Obviously, Mario died as well this week, but that's a whole other thing. Nintendo get rid of games that are only 6 months old. Never mind old consoles. So everyone looks a bit crap except Microsoft this week, but here you are. So yeah, anyway, that's enough for this week. If you want to catch us on social media, you can find us at Beat the Sheet on Twitter. Always there posting the very latest Game Pass news, so it's a great place to keep up to date on stuff like that. If you want to drop us an email, you can find us at beatthesheetpodcast@gmail.com. We always love hearing from you guys. We're always interested in your thoughts on the show and just on Game Pass stuff in general, really. And if you want to catch us on our YouTube channel, we post all the episodes there now, and the comment thread below the episodes is a great place to just chat about this week's show, really. You know, we'll be dropping in there. We'll be talking to you too. So if you've got any thoughts, that's a good place to catch us. I'll put the link to the YouTube channel in the episode description, so you should be able to see it there. And until next time, I'm Andy Wood, and I am on 68% of the sheet. Not making a ton of progress at the moment, but don't know. Maybe I just need to do a run of Battlefield titles like Josh, and then I'll be racing up to 70%.
And my name is Josh Stevenson. I remain on 58% of the sheet, despite completing 2 Battlefield games. So not only was I miserable, I gained nothing from it. That, in many ways, is the tagline for this show.
That's the show. All right. Thanks a lot for listening this week, guys, and we'll catch you next week.
Goodbye.